Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by WEEI's John Lyons. And John, we were just saying before we went live, it's been a while here. It's probably been over a month, but we're back, and you're going to be seeing more of us now as we get closer to training camp here as we get our way through July. But before we do that, we do have a mandatory mini camp, which kicks off tomorrow up at Gillette Stadium. Patriots will be practicing tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then they're pretty much off for the next 6 weeks after that until you start to talk about training camp when coaches come back. And about a week after that, the players report. But, John, I mean, it's been a busy offseason. Of course, they've had OTAs up here in the last few weeks. You also have the Stephon Diggs situation. A lot has been going on since the last time you and I talked Patriots football.
Yeah, and all those draft picks we talked about on our Patriots Pulse draft shows have now been kind of integrated into the fold. Some of them running, if you will, with the ones, quote unquote, during OTAs. We'll see if they do during minicamp. And this has been, if you look back on it, I mean, today's June 8th. If you go back to, January 8th, which actually I think was the date that Joe Milton and Gerard Mayo won that last regular season game. I mean, these 6 months have been a almost complete overhaul of the Patriots, from Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels and Terrell Williams coming in to all the new free agent signings on defense, obviously Diggs on offense as well, the overhaul on offense via the draft. So we're looking at a football team now that is vastly different than the one that we were doing post-game shows for just 6 months ago.
Yeah, they really are. And I think you've seen a lot of that come to fruition on the field. Of course, our Kevin Stone has been up there updating you on all the action in person. But it really, vibe is different. And I hate that's so overstated, right? Like, we get so hung up on vibes. And that's, I feel like that's a big thing, especially this time. And it's hard because, you made it live. It's hard to evaluate these this time of year because they're not in pads. So it's not a really fair evaluation. Like Will Campbell, can we really evaluate him right now in just helmets? It's hard to evaluate him. We're going to get a better feel for his comfort level and potentially how good he's going to be once they get into training camp and they get into pads. But I do think it's important to point out, though, that there's still a lot of value in what they're doing in this phase of the offseason, because we are getting our first look at these rookies. We are getting our first look at the free agents and how they're being integrated into the schemes. But more importantly, we're also getting our first look at the coaching staff and how they're going to function, how Mike Vrabel is going to do things. Now, of course, Mike Vrabel's early tenure here in New England has been challenged here the last couple of weeks with what happened with Stephon Diggs over Memorial Day weekend on that boat down in Florida. A lot of talk about the video, of course, the pink substance, all that other stuff. Personally, John, I don't give a crap about any of that. We're not here to litigate that. What I think is more important, and what I've been watching, and maybe it's the coach in me, and we both coached, is how is Vrabel handling this? What is your opinion on the way Vrabel has handled that situation so far?
So I will say this too before I get to that, and I agree with you that the vibe thing is usually a very overused word, but things do seem more locked in and dialed in this offseason and this offseason program than they were a year ago under Gerard Mayo and Alex Van Pelt. And you just go back to last year, and you and I talked about this ad nauseum. It was just, let's do the opposite of everything Bill Belichick did, right? Like, that was their whole philosophy.
Yeah.
You and I talked about that.
Plan.
Yes, the plan was be anti-Bill, right? That and you go over to Elliot Wolf saying less of a hard-ass culture, all that. But you remember Mayo and his group started OTAs a few days late because they really weren't ready to get them going, right? And it just kind of fed over into stuff that didn't look that great. And you and I talked about all training camp as well, and obviously it resulted in a bad season. This year it feels a little bit more dialed in and a little bit more locked in, and things feel like they're building onto each other. And that's one of the reasons too this Diggs situation is so interesting, because I think it's the first real challenge for Mike Vrabel. Because you look at Vrabel comes in, everyone's excited because, hey, they've had 2 bad years, but this guy's a Patriots legend. He had success in Tennessee. He's going to come in. McDaniels comes back, which I know there's a weird segment of fans and media that hate McDaniels, but he's an elite OC. He had a lot of success here. He comes back. They spend this
Yeah, and I'm
money in
glad
free.
you mentioned that. I want to touch on that because
Yeah.
it's not just members of the media that have this vitriolic response to McDaniel's return, but I've also talked to some fans that don't love it either. So I do want to get into that. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and then you go beyond that, like, they spent this money in free agency, the draft, so everything was kinda good news, if you will, or felt better than last year. In this Diggs situation, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the first thing that you kinda looked at and said, "Oh, this isn't right. Like, this is a problem." And I think we'll see how Vrabel handles it long term. I mean, Diggs came back to practice, so it feels like there was some sort of conversation between the team and him that said, "You should come back out here. This doesn't look good." And look, the boat thing doesn't look good. If I was a coach of Diggs, I would not be happy about it. And I don't think they're happy about it from kind of little hints and behavior we've seen. But I think they handled it as a team kind of as well as you could have there, in that it became a big story in New England, but it didn't blow up into a national story per se. They got him back out there, and when he was out there, he was on the same page with everyone. So it's not a good situation. It's not a good look. If I was his coach, I'd be upset about it. It feels like so far, though, Vrabel has handled it kind of as well as he could have.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And again, there's a lot of elements to this too that, quite frankly, if it gets to another level, the league's going to get involved. And once the league gets involved, that kind of takes Vrabel and the Patriots out of it to an extent. So the league may look at this and say, there's nothing there. You guys handle it however you want internally. Or the league might look into this and say, no, there could be something there. We're gonna jump in and we're gonna do our due diligence, investigate it, and then we'll go from there. But I think so much was made about the pink substance and everything else, people jumping to conclusions. Me personally, I don't think it was a big deal. I didn't
Yeah, it
have
was
a
Big
problem
League
with it.
Chew.
Yeah, strawberry flavored.
Yeah.
But like the thing is, why record it? That would be my only issue. If I were
Yeah.
Vrabel, I would sit down with him, having been a head coach, I would sit down with him and say, look, this is not a good look for the organization, not a good look for the team. You put us in a tough spot. You put yourself in a tough spot. We got to figure a way out of this. Now, as far as what you were doing on that boat, that is, I'm not going to be the one that ultimately judges you. Someone above me is going to do that. At the end of the day, though, we have an expectation here and a standard, and you have to meet that standard, or else. It would be my one warning to him. The other thing I would say is, why are you recording this? You want to go down to Miami Beach and have a great time on Memorial Day weekend? You're a grown-ass man. Go do you. Do what you want to do. But don't record it. Be
Yeah.
smarter than
Just a
that.
lack of self-awareness.
Yeah, especially living in a world now where people take out their phones at every turn. And who's to say he even wanted it recorded? For all we know, it could have been someone that was on the boat that decided to record it. He didn't necessarily push back against it being recorded. And then all of a sudden it's leaked and it's out there and it's public. So I would stress that as well. You got to be smarter than that. You know better. You've been in this league for 10 years. You know how it works. You can't do that. You can't let something like that get out. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but it is going to impact your ability to play in this league and in this organization if you keep doing things like that. I think more was made of it than probably should have been made. But again, we'll see what comes out of it here as we go along this week, of course, with mandatory minicamp and the rest of the offseason. I do want to come back to the McDaniels conversation because I find it interesting, John, that there's so many people both in this media market and even some fans who don't like this move. And you and I have been on record as saying we love this move because to me, I don't care what McDaniels did in Denver. I don't care what he did in Vegas. I don't care what he did anywhere else in his coaching career. I'm judging him based on what he's done here. If you want to hold it against him that he coached Tom Brady, well, that's your issue. I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to look at the job he did with Mac Jones in 2021 as far as what I think he could do for Drake May. I loved the hire from the beginning. I felt that they needed to go back to being a more multiple offense. You can't just be what the modern West Coast offense is, which is primarily an 11 personnel system. You've got to be able to venture out of it. I think they're going to look more like what Kyle Shanahan does in San Francisco in terms of blending some of those ideas into their multiple offense. I love the hire. I think he's going to be here a while. I don't think that the itch for him personally is there to be a head coach right now. I also obviously don't think the interest is there. But we both like the hire from the beginning. I don't understand the Josh McDaniels hate.
Yeah, I love the hire. I think he's been an elite offensive coordinator for almost 20 years now in the NFL. If you go back to '05 when he was running the Patriots offense and didn't have the title yet. And look, 2 points on this, John. First of all, the reason I think Patriots fans, there's a segment of them that don't like him is twofold. One is the Patriots had a good offense for 20 years. But in those rare moments when the offense struggled or wasn't good, rather than blame Belichick or blame Brady for making a bad throw, people channeled that anger to McDaniels because I think he was an easy guy to blame because he wasn't Brady and he wasn't Bill. And again, those were rare that those moments happened, but I think people did that. And I think the other part of it is people look at his stint in Denver without Brady and Bill, his stint in Vegas without Brady and Bill, and his 1 year in St. Louis as OC without Brady and Bill. And none of those, in fairness, went well. And people get worried. But I think on that, first of all, being a head coach, as you know, John, is vastly different from being an OC. So, yes, Denver didn't work out well. And honestly, let's remember, him deciding to draft Tim Tebow was a huge mistake in the first round. I don't think it was the structure of the offense. I think he drafted a guy who couldn't play quarterback in the NFL, just like in Vegas. Him hitching his wagon to Jimmy Garoppolo, a quarterback, was a mistake. I don't think it was the structure of the offense. And that year in St. Louis, I know I'm not saying the offense wasn't bad there, but it was a lame duck head coach. He was there for 1 year. Sam Bradford got hurt. He ended up using 3 quarterbacks that year. He had one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Danny Amendola got hurt in week 1, so he really only had one good receiver, which was Brandon Lloyd, all year that year. And by the way, if he had been so bad, Lloyd wouldn't have followed him to Foxborough the next year. So I think if you really look at the context of it, you can pick any offensive coordinator you want. None of them would have done well in 2011 in St. Louis. It was a terrible, terrible situation from coach. I mean, the team moved 5 years later. That's how bad it was. But from coaching to personnel, it was just nobody would have been good there. So that's why I think people or a segment of them are concerned about it. As far as how he's going to do here, look, I think you can say, all right, he coached Brady and he had Gronk and he had Randy Moss and Wes Welker. I get it. But look at the other quarterbacks he worked with. Like I think the best football Jimmy Garoppolo ever played was those first 2 weeks in 2016 in New England when he was playing for Josh. Mac Jones, who we've all come to see, is not a very good player. They had 6th in the league in points per game offense and the 4th fewest 3 and outs with that offense in 2021. But the year, John, and I want to get your thoughts on this, the year I look at most when I project Josh with Drake May, it's actually 2008 with Matt Castle.
You just took the words out of my mouth.
And the reason for me is that was an offense. And look, they had Moss and Welker, which is better than any skill players the Patriots have now. I get it. But that was a team that had a pretty good defense. It had an improving, I thought a good offensive line from the year before. And I think this offensive line won't be great, but I think it'll be a lot better than the year before. And I think when you look at the profile of Castle, Drake May has been was drafted as an inexperienced guy, started most of last year. Castle had even less experience than May, never started in college, but the profile of the player, a guy with good arm talent who generally could make good decisions, but also could run, and I think run more than people gave him credit for. When you start stacking those up, I mean, you could say Matt Castle, profile-wise, obviously not the same talent, but much more similar to Drake May than Mac Jones or Garoppolo or Brissett or Brady were. So that's the year I look to, and that was an offense that by the end of the year was really good. I mean, in '08, they were top 10 in points per game. Matt Castle had 400 yards passing in back-to-back games late in that season. Only Patriots quarterback ever to do that. So that's the year, John, that I look at as '08. And if you look at '08 and how Josh changed the offense from '07, '08 and structured it, I think there's some real positive signs to look at with Drake May this year.
Yeah, and you just took the words out of my mouth. For me, I'm judging him on '08, the job he did with Matt Castle in 2021. I don't give 2 shits what he did with the Rams. I really don't. Nobody should. That was 14 years ago, and you just outlined how bad that situation was.
It was arguably the worst situation in the NFL that entire year, and he was a lame duck.
Yeah. So forget about that. And if you want to judge him on '09 and 2010 in Denver with the Tim Tebow fiasco, fine. Judge him on that. If you want to judge him in his brief tenure in Vegas, fine. Judge him on that. But to hold it against him that he coached Brady, I think is just so ridiculous. I mean, honestly, if you want to go there, let's go there. You just made the case using 08 and 21 in New England. Forget about what he did outside of here. In New England as proof that the guy can coach and be successful without Tom Brady. And he's going to be coaching with a guy, Mike Vrabel, who intellectually is one of the best situational coaches in the NFL. He's not going to put McDaniels in a bad position when it comes to situational decision making, plain and simple. So I think that in many ways, that's going to empower Josh McDaniels even more. So this idea, and again, this isn't a knock on people in the media, because some of the people that are making these comments are close friends of mine in the business. All I'm saying is, if he sucks after this season, fine, go after him, clamor for change. But I think the fact that people are over here saying, well, I prefer this guy or that guy, I just think it's idiotic. And look, if Nick Caley wanted to come back here, he would have come back here last year. Clearly, to his credit, he had enough foresight. He read the tea leaves. He knew this wasn't a good situation to come back to. And as far as this year is concerned, for all we know, maybe he didn't want to come back here at all. Maybe he didn't want to relocate his family back here. We don't know what their situation was like when he lived here. Maybe in his eyes, he looked at it and said to himself, you know what? I want a clean break from the past. I want to chart my own course. I don't want to be tethered to an organization I was a part of before. I think for him, going to Houston is a great move. I think he gets to walk in. I think he gets to blend what he did here under McDaniels with what he learned from McVay in LA. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. I don't think it's going to be the traditional 11 personnel zone scheme that you saw in LA. I think you're going to see more man gap concepts, which I think you're going to see here with the Patriots as well. But I think the bottom line is, I just feel like it's faux outrage. Let's be pissed that they hired McDaniels. Let's be pissed that they didn't hire some up-and-coming hotshot position coach who profiles as a potential coordinator and future head coach. So that's my other issue, John, to be honest with you, is I think that the overexposure of coaches today, it's idiotic. The media's response to some of these guys is just idiotic. Like, they act like they know their entire career arc. Like Nick Caley is all of a sudden going to be the next Bill Belichick. You know, just give him time. Like, I mean, give me a break. He was the tight ends coach here. Can we stop pretending like somehow Nick Caley was going to go from being the tight ends coach here to the savior of the organization? And it's not a knock on Nick. He's a terrific coach. I know people that know him, that have coached with him. They speak highly of him. It's not a knock on him. It's a knock on this notion that somehow everybody all of a sudden now is a coaching background expert. It drives me nuts.
And if you look at some of the guys people are hopeful for, whether it was Caley or if Brian Daboll had gotten fired by the Giants, like, these are guys that learned from McDaniels. Right? Like, so, you know, and look, and
why not have the guy who taught them?
Yeah, and I understand, like, if you wanted
it's
a more
like saying, I don't want the master plumber, I want the apprentice. Give me a break.
And look, I understand if you were hoping for a Shanahan-esque guy and someone from that tree, I get it.
You got that last year, though.
Yeah, and it wasn't good, right? But right. I also look at...
You also ran that system in 2022, might I add.
Yes, with a non-Shanahan disciple.
Or parts of the system, however you want to.
But you're right. But I think also, too, another year, if you're worried about how they're going to adapt, I already outlined 2008, but look at 2016. Right, like I mentioned, the best Garoppolo played, in my opinion, was those first 2 weeks of the 2016 season. That first half against Miami in week 2, I thought, oh my God, Tom Brady.
This is why you're the best Patriots co-host in the market right here.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying this to kiss up to you, and this is why I love working with you, because most people would not reference that year, and that is an awesome reference, because I think that illustrates your point even more, what he did that year with Garoppolo and Brissett.
And so, thank you. And so you look at those first 2 weeks, I think that was arguably the best Garoppolo ever played. Like that first half against Miami in week 2 before he got the shoulder injury, I honestly, John, and it sounds silly now, I sat there and said, wow, Brady might have a few more years here and this guy's going to take, like, that's how good he was. And then he gets hurt. You bring Brissett in on a short week, Thursday Night Football against Houston, adjusted their offense, and Jerry Shulpinski deserves credit for that as well. He never gets enough credit. But you ran a kind of different style offense in that Thursday night game, and you won 27-0. against Houston. And then Brissett got hurt, so you lost the next week to Buffalo when Garoppolo was hurt and Brissett couldn't throw. And remember, Martellus Bennett has said in the years afterwards, they thought Jimmy was going to play in that week 4 and they would win. Jimmy wasn't able to go. Brissett was hurt. But point being, so you won with Garoppolo, who was in his first couple starts in a different style a little bit than Brady. Then you play Brissett, a much different style than Brady and Garoppolo. You still win on Thursday Night Football. Then Brady comes back in week 5 and you lose one game the rest of the year en route to a Super Bowl championship. Like, to me, 3 different quarterbacks, 3 different styles. You win almost all they lost 2 games that year. You win consistently with all 3 of them. You win the Super Bowl. And he also, one last point on this too, because everybody talks about the McVay tree and the Shanahan tree and all that. Josh outcoached Sean McVay in Super Bowl 53. And I know we always talk about Belichick shutting down that offense, and he deserves immense credit. But it was Josh who made, that 21 personnel adjustment late in the game to get the Rams in their base defense and spread them out.
He made that adjustment the second half of that season. If you remember,
they did do it more with Burkhead.
A heavy 21-22 team. It became the Sony Michel show. It took a lot of pressure off Brady. It took some pressure off the offensive line in the passing game, and it complemented the defense that year. And again, a lot of people will say that was the most boring Super Bowl of my lifetime. I don't care about style points. I want touchdowns and points that matter and wins. And at the end of the day, it was an ugly game, but they executed that game plan to a T. And again, it illustrates your point that this is one of McDaniel's strengths, in my opinion. This is why for years the book on that Patriots offense was that they were game plan specific, that they were a week-to-week offense. And that season, particularly that playoff
shows
run,
it so well.
It illustrates that so well that they were always willing to do whatever it took, that the multiplicity of their offense allowed them to change their style of play on a week-to-week basis, and that's what put them in a position to win championships. And I think ultimately this is what's going to help them rise to prominence again. This is why my hope is he sticks around for the bulk of his career here. As long as Vrabel's here, I want him here. I know that if they have success, there's going to be that 1 or 2 owners out there that's going to say, screw what he did in the past. Clearly the guy can coach. He deserves a third shot. But my hope is that that's not until down the road, because I think that if he's given the right pieces and he's allowed to run the system, and I've talked to people that know Josh personally, he's very flexible with the assistants. Guys are going to have a voice. I think if that happens, this offense is going to be really good again. A lot of it, obviously, is going to depend on May's development. We know that, and how he fits into the system. And speaking of that, before we do preview mini camp here, I do want to ask you about your thoughts on the spring that Drake May has had. Of course, a couple weeks ago, he had that 4-interception practice, which what was the reaction to that was nuclear. It was ridiculous. I mean, I'm talking people off the ledge at work. Oh, my goodness. I mean, see, McDaniels wasn't the right hire. See, I knew this guy was careless with the ball. I'm not buying into him. I think he's going to have the sophomore. It was just ridiculous. The reaction off of one OTA practice was absurd. All that being said, your impressions of Drake May's spring thus far?
So, and this is probably the coach in me, John, and this reminds me back when I was coaching and we had spring practice, which is similar to OTAs, not exactly the same. What I look for in those is progress, right? And a lot of it too is who's lining up with who. Are you lining up correctly? Are you getting all your assignments correctly? So yeah, he had an early practice where he threw 4 picks. That's bad, as we know. But I think you look at it now, and recently he's had better practices. He's getting accustomed to things. I wouldn't be surprised in minicamp if he has 1 off day and then 2 really good days, because he's a second-year quarterback learning a new offense. And it's also not just him. And I think this is an important point. So Hunter Henry knows this offense. Ramondre Stevenson knows this offense. Mike Onwenu knows this offense. Basically, nobody else does on the Patriots offense, right? Like their receivers don't know this offense, except I guess DeMario Douglas, because he played for Bill O'Brien that one year. But basically, nobody else knows this. So they're all learning too. So May has to figure out where everyone's supposed to be. He has to make the right reads, but other guys have to make sure they're in the right spots as well. So I'm not surprised they had a practice or 2 early on that didn't look good. And I think the key is it getting better? Is it looking better? Now, when you and I are down at training camp on August 12th, if he's throwing 4 picks, I'm going to have a big problem with it. But in May, not so much, right? In early June, not as much. So that's really what I look for. And it feels like to me, he's made progress. And you and I have talked about this. The biggest thing he has to work on is the turnovers in key spots. Really, that's it. And I think with Josh, that and Vrabel especially, that's going to be a big focus. So I feel like he's gotten better over OTAs, and that's really what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I agree. It's about progress, and it's about him taking steps to get better, to be more comfortable in the offense. You got to remember, he's going to be running his second different offense in 2 years, which has been a problem with the Patriots in recent years, the turnover at the offensive coordinator position.
5 offenses in 5 years, if you include
5 offenses in 5 years. Yeah, right. And then you have 4 different coordinators in the last 4 years. I mean, that's just, again, that's hard on a veteran quarterback. Never mind a quarterback going into his second year in the league. So here he is learning Alex Van Pelt's system and the modern West Coast offense. And now there'll be remnants of that. But now he's got to learn brand new terminology. He's got to learn the Patriots system, or as I like to call it, just to be different, the East Coast offense. But the bottom line is, you've got to take that into account when you evaluate him this time of year. You can't sit there and say, oh, my goodness, he threw 4 picks. All of a sudden, I turned into Kevin. But, like, the bottom line is, let's just wait it out. And I think you bring up a great point. He has gotten better since then.
Yeah.
He looked pretty good last week. Now, I do think, and again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I do think, though, that this is a big week for him. I think he needs to have 3 solid practices and build some momentum heading into training camp. That's got to be the priority here. If he goes out this week and has a 4-interception practice, is it the end of the world? Will I overreact? Will I throw my hands up and cry? No, but you've been practicing in this system now for a few weeks. You can even say months. He's got to continue to progress and show improvement. You don't want to see the interceptions. You don't want to see the carelessness with the ball. We've said this all offseason, John. In many ways, when you think about what does Drake May need to do to continue to develop and get better, priority number 1 is taking care of the ball. That was the weakest part of his game last year. He has got to fix that, both from a ball handling standpoint and a decision-making standpoint. So I'm going to be looking at that this week. I want to see how he's managing the offense, managing the huddle, the operation, adjusting personnel, checks, audibles, getting guys in and out of alignment. Those are the things I'm going to be looking at. But I also want to see, is he taking care of the football? Or is he trying to force sand up a flea's ass and put the ball in places he shouldn't? Because if he's doing that, like we said, that's going to be problematic.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think, you and I talked about this in training camp, and I actually had a conversation with Drake May in December about this. One thing I want to see him improve on, and maybe we can get a glimpse of it at minicamp, is he taking the checkdowns more? And that's going to be a big part of McDaniel's offense.
Former offensive coordinator at UMass, Kevin Morris, used to say that to us every time, whether I saw him at a clinic or talked to him one-on-one. Checkdowns for quarterbacks, he used to say, are like putting money in the bank. It's a deposit on your next down. And that's a great analogy because it's true.
Yeah, and I think you've done a good job illustrating how, like, in Van Pelt's offense, it was very much a 5-out offense, and they would get the running back involved in pass patterns. I think with Josh, you're going to see the back end for protection more, but you're also going to see more just kind of swings and checkdowns in his offense, which should make things easier for Drake. So I want to see, does he hit the checkdowns more? And also, this is a training camp thing. How does he do with when they go empty and the defense brings pressure, getting to the hot read quickly? Because that was something I think he was inconsistent with last year. He got better, I felt, as the year went on with it, but it's something I want to see. Hey, can you do that consistently? Because if you can go empty and figure out the hot read quickly, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. So I'd like to see that. And again, that's probably more of a training camp thing when they're in pads, but that's another thing I'm watching for as well with him.
And that's a great point. They didn't run a ton of empty last year. They haven't really run a lot of empty the last 3 years. They're going to run more of it with Josh back at the helm of the offense now. And you talk about that heart read. When you think about empty, the majority of your pressure comes from the boundary. You're going to get that nickel corner off the slot. You're going to get that you're going to get a safety in B gap. Like, they bring boundary pressure. You'll get that off-ball backer off the boundary as well, depending on what personnel they're in and what front they're in. So his ability to identify that pressure, not take the cheese on a sim pressure and make the right read is going to be vitally important because, again, they're going to run more empty under McDaniels than they have in recent years. So to your point, it's those little things that the coaches and us are going to look for in terms of how he manages the position and manages the offense. And let's be clear on one thing. Every single quarterback in football at every level is a game manager. They're managing the offense. It is not a negative term. It is not a criticism of the quarterback. Every quarterback that plays the position is a game manager. They're managing the offense, okay? Now, the management of the offense varies. It's different degrees, but the bottom line is every quarterback that plays the position is managing the offense. That's going to be vitally important. We want to see how he does that. I think this week will give us a pretty good indication. You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by WEEI's John Lyons, and we're back with you after a brief hiatus. We will be returning to action more frequently here in the coming weeks as we head into training camp. And Lyons just said to me, my mic sounds spotty. So I'm going to, and I'm just going to use.
But so I'll make a quick point while you fix that, John. And for me, I'm also looking at personnel groupings too, right? Like how much is Travion Henderson on the field? Is he on the field with Ramondre Stevenson? Are they alternating? Do they do 21 personnel? Do they do any 22 personnel? Is it 12 personnel? Like that's a big thing for me I'm looking for because I think one thing McDaniels has been good at is mixing up personnel groups over his career. I think that'll be helpful for Drake May. And also, I mean, let's face it, they have a lot of uncertainty at the receiver position, whether it's Diggs coming back from the injury, Kyle Williams is a rookie, Polk and Baker had really bad seasons last year. Can they get one good player out of the two of them? We'll see. Demario Douglas, I think, is a pretty good player, but it's still a new-ish system for him. Kendrick Bourne is kind of fully back from that injury, I guess. So point being, they have a lot of uncertainty at receiver. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see 21 personnel or heavy 12 personnel. So, and I think that's something in minicamp at the very least we can look at and say, okay, what personnel groups do they like and use the most? And who's lining up with who? Is Kyle Williams lining up with the ones? Is Mac Hollins your 1X and Stephon Diggs your 1Z with Douglas in the slot? Or is it a mix of guys? Is it, do they like Travion Henderson sometimes in the slot like they've used Rex Burkhead in the past? Like that's, I think, a really big thing offensively. And, of course, defensively, who's your nickel corner, right? Is it Marcus Jones? Do they want to go three safeties instead? Or is it a bigger body like an Alex Austin, which I don't think it will be in the slot. But point is, those are the things I think to really look for in minicamp is what personnel groupings do they use and who do they like in those groups?
So you kind of sort of jumped ahead because our next segment was going to be to preview minicamp. And I was going to ask you 5 things you're looking for in minicamp. So let's just get right into that. Yeah. What are 5 things you're looking for in this week's minicamp? And I guess we could start there. We could use those as your first 2 examples.
Yeah, so it's what personnel groupings are they in, number 1, and who's in those groups. Honestly, those I kind of put on a separate tier. Like those are especially without pads. Like if they were in pads, I'd say, how does Will Campbell look? What are they doing at left guard? How do the defensive tackles look? But without pads, it's really those personnel groupings, especially offensively, and who's getting the most run with those. That's what I'm looking for. And then the other things are kind of like, how do the corners look? Because I think Davis and Gonzalez could be an elite combination together. How does the offense just flow in general? And how does the defense look without Terrell Williams? He hasn't been there. We'll see if he's there. I know he's had a medical issue. So but to me, there's a separate tier of how does the personnel groupings look and who's where.
Yeah, for me, in terms of 5 things that I'm going to be looking for this week, number 1, of course, is the continued progression of Drake May. We talked about that, him getting acclimated to McDaniel's system and him being more comfortable with it. We've seen the last couple of weeks that he is certainly more comfortable with it. Now I'd like to see him continue to grow in that role in terms of his comfort level. I think this week is going to be big for him. And again, like I said earlier,
If he goes out and has a 4-interception practice this week, that's a problem. It's a problem, and it needs to be addressed heading into training camp because, as you said, if he's doing this on August 12th, it's time to raise the red flag. I think the number 2 thing I'm looking at is not just how players get acclimated to the offense and how they're used. I also want to see how they're going to be used on defense. Offensively, yeah, I want to see how Travion Henderson is used. I want to see how Kyle Williams is used. I want to see how they're going to mix and match personnel in the different personnel groupings to try to create matchups. On defense, though, I want to see a clearer picture because schematically and philosophically, this defense is going to be different than what we saw for 24 years under Bill Belichick. This is going to be more of an attacking one-gap scheme. It's not going to be about controlling gaps, as I've said all along. It's going to be about taking gaps. And I think you're going to see a more aggressive scheme. And I want to see how they use their fronts, how they use their personnel within those fronts. What are they doing coverage-wise? Not necessarily they're playing man versus zone. Are they blending? I'm not looking into that necessarily. I think we'll get a better idea of that in camp. But I want to see how they're matching the front to the cover with the emphasis being front variation. That's what I'm looking for. One of my criticisms of Belichick was he was very spotty when it came to front variation. There were times on a year-to-year basis where I thought their front variation was unbelievable. They were going to show you a 0 front, a 10 front, a 20 front, a 30 front, a 40 front. They were going to mix. They were going to match. They were going to do a lot of different things. They were going to bring pressure. They were going to bluff and sim. They were going to do all these things. I want to see all of that, but I want to see it on a week-to-week basis. I want to see that philosophy of being game plan specific make its way over to the defensive side of the ball because I do think for all his greatness, at times I felt Belichick was rigid defensively. I think that you're going to see a little bit of a different philosophy here. I think the third thing I'm going to be focusing on is the rookies getting back to Travion Henderson, Will Campbell, Kyle Williams, those guys. They shouldn't be able to have more on their plate now. They've been here a month. It'll be interesting to see how much more they have on their plate. They've been around the organization enough now that they should be able to do more. We'll see that this week in minicamp. The other thing I'm looking forward to is I want to see how some of these veterans are approaching this with the rookies because when you look at this team on paper, John, it's still a pretty young football team. A lot of the free agents that they brought in are on the younger side. I want to see how they blend with these rookies because while you have a nice core group of veterans, you also let a lot of leadership walk out the door this offseason with Andrews and Jones and Dietrich Wise. So I want to see how these free agents come in and are fully acclimated with the entire team there. But I also want to see them take more of a leadership role. We haven't really seen that so far, and it's early. We're going to get a better idea of that in camp. But I'd like to see more of that, of course, starting with this mini camp. And finally, Vrabel. We've got a pretty good glimpse of what he's going to be like as a head coach. Obviously, we haven't seen him in in-game situations yet. We're not going to see that until September. But I do want to see how he continues to run this practice. He's been very active, very vocal, moving around. He brings a lot of energy. The players have really connected with him. It's hard not to. The guy played in the league. He gets what they're going through. He gets them. They get him. They speak the same language. The vibe is good. So I'd like to see, with this being mandatory and being more businesslike, I want to see how does that change him? How does that change him? Does that change the tenor a little bit? Does that change his approach, the way he is? I wouldn't mind seeing a guy or two take a lap. I wouldn't mind hearing a couple of F-bombs being dropped because I do think you're going to see that from Vrabel. I don't think we've seen that side of him yet. But I wouldn't mind seeing that now because you want to set a tone going into training camp.
Yeah, and your point on like how young the roster is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Kyle Duggar is their most or longest tenured player, right? Second round pick in 2020. I mean, he beats Anthony Jennings by like an hour. But I mean, those guys, it's him, Jennings, Mike Onwenu, those guys from the 2020 draft, I think are their longest tenured players. So that's still, and I mean, that's what 5 years ago. Like that's a young, and I know they've brought in veteran free agents obviously since then, but like it's a lot of young guys they're expecting to contribute. And I think some of them are going to contribute at a high level, but we got to expect some of them are going to have some bumps in the road there as they go. And I'm glad you brought up defensively and what they're going to do defensively, because I think Patriots fans are going to see a scheme, especially up front, that attacks a lot more than they're used to, right? Because I feel like under Bill and even under Mayo last year with Covington, they would be a little bit more conservative. Not that they would never blitz. I mean, I remember those Jamie Collins high tower A gap blitzes they did all the time, right? And they would sometimes, but they would lean more conservative up front. Now, there were certain years that there were exceptions to that. 2014, when you had Revis and Browner, you could do whatever you wanted up front because you had those guys. But I think this scheme is going to be more, we'll attack up front, and we have the corners to hold up in Davis and Gonzalez, and we'll be okay. Whereas I think under Bill, even when they had good corners, it was still, let's keep the quarterback in the pocket first. Let's collapse the pocket and get pressure that way. And I'm not saying they won't do any of that now, but I think that's going to be, for me, kind of a fun thing to watch. Like, how do they do this differently? Is it, are they going to do exclusively single gap stuff? Are they just going to tell their defensive tackles, hey, penetrate upfield and we'll work our edge guys off that? Like, how are they going to approach that? Because in Detroit, too, Terrell Williams, I mean, he had Aiden Hutchinson, which is a top 3 edge rusher in the league. So, I think you have good edge players here, but you don't have a top 3 edge rusher in the league. So how does he adapt to that? And that's something, again, more of a training camp thing when they put pads on. But at the very least in minicamp, what do their personnel groupings look like up front? Because I think a personnel grouping with Barmore and Milton Williams and Keon White could be a really effective pass rushing trio up front.
Yeah, and I think Keon White is a guy to keep an eye on because I do think from a scheme fit standpoint, he's going to be a pretty good fit in this defense. I think it's going to play more to his strengths. He's not a guy that's going to necessarily read hats, get hands on people, and squeeze and control gaps. He's a guy that needs to be cut loose. And I think you're going to see them move him around all over the place.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm excited to see him inside with Milton Williams. I think that's going to be a nice sub-package pairing for them, where they can kick him inside, kick Williams inside. They can play those double 2 eyes. They can play those double 2s, and then they can do a lot of twist stuff with them and a lot of pressures with the backers and slanting and moving them. I also want to see, Keon White on the outside with Christian Barmore and Milton Williams inside. So I think that they're going to have a lot of combinations that they can run. But then the other piece of this, to your point about pass rush, I want to see Harold Landry more. I want to see Kayvon Chason, because there's a guy that a lot of people aren't talking about, but Kayvon Chason in a sub-package situational pass rush role could be a really productive player for them. It's the same thing with Braden Swinson. I think the two of them could really carve out, very similar players, both played at LSU, but the two of them could really carve out a role for themselves in those sub-packages. So there's a lot of versatility there. I mean, you're talking about 6 pass rushers. And forget about the Super Bowl. And I know everybody points to that Philadelphia-Kansas City Super Bowl. But, John, this has always been the recipe for success in this league in the modern era. You've got to be able to carry 6 to 7 defensive line, defensive end, edge guys that can all rush the passer. If you can develop those guys, if you can draft them, develop them, sign them, have them on your roster, it gives you a chance for success. This isn't the 1980s, okay? You're not taking on the Chicago Bears. You're not taking on the counter-trey Washington Redskins under Joe Gibbs. This is a pass-first league, and you've got to have guys that can elongate their stance, get into that sprinter stance, pin their effing ears back, and go. Read the snap and just jump the offensive lineman's hip and bend and lean and win. And I think that's where the league is now. And I think that when you look at this defense and what they're doing schematically, this is what they're going to be now. And look, from a fan perspective, if I'm a Patriots fan, I love this shit because it's going to be a different style of defense. They're going to be more aggressive. You talked about them doing a lot of double A gap stuff with Hightower and Collins. You're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot.
I could see Spillane being a guy they do that with a little bit.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of double A gap bluff and drop. You're going to see them mug gaps, and they're going to either go or drop. They're going to do a lot of different sim stuff, and I think that that's important because that's where the game is now. I don't care who it is in the league, whether it's Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patty Mahomes. I don't care who it is, and I call him that because he insists on being called Patrick, which I think is obnoxious. Anybody who sounds like Kermit the Frog, I don't care how many Super Bowls he's won. We'll call you whatever we want, okay? Anyway, nonetheless, like I said,
I think that stuff that's been missing from this scheme, it's going to be nice to see it. Now, we could also be getting ahead of ourselves. Remember, as I said earlier, Vrabel is a situational, cerebral coach. And they are going to be a week-to-week defense from an operational standpoint, just like the offense. But I still want to see that aggressive stuff. I love that stuff. I believe in it. Hopefully they're as aggressive as I think they're going to be.
One other guy we haven't talked about that I'm going to have my eye on in minicamp and training camp is Craig Woodson. Right? They draft him at 106 overall, and this is a guy that he played, what, 300?
He's a three-level player. He's a 3x3 safety.
Right. 328 snaps at free safety last year, but 255 at box safety. Also played some slot corner as well. And I look at their safety group, John, and I don't know if I'm overrating this, but I'm a little concerned there because I feel like Kyle Duggar is plateaued. He had an injury last year, but he didn't look that good. Peppers, I know, had the off the field thing last year, but even just looking at on the field, he's going to be 30 this fall. I think he's a good player and a really nice fit in their previous scheme. Is he going to fit as well?
How does he fit into this one?
In this current scheme? Like, I think,
I think even though they've played a lot of man coverage in recent years, I think they're going to play a lot more pure man coverage here, where you're going to ask
Terrell Williams played a shitload of it in Detroit. They played the most man coverage in the NFL in Detroit last year.
Yeah.
So that's why, and I think Woodson, and they haven't had a true free safety guy since Devin McCourty retired. So is that Woodson? But if Woodson is better than Duggar or Peppers, do they put him down in the box and have
Woodson reminds me not so much, well, a little bit physically. I think he's a longer athlete, but he reminds me a ton of Patrick Chung.
Yeah,
that's
Chung
how
was
he's
not
going to be used in this scheme.
And Chung was a box safety guy, and he was elite as a box safety guy. So that's why, to me, and like then I look at Marte Mapu, who I thought last year was one of only 3 guys that got better as the season went on, the other 2 being May and Milton.
Another guy that's going to need to play a big part in this defense,
so
3x3 guy.
And are we looking, and not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but in 2026, are we looking at a safety tandem of Mapu and Woodson? And that's what they're going to do the next few years. So that's, to me, that's a position group that I don't know if I would go as far to say I'm really worried about them, but I do have some concerns because Duggar's, again, coming off the injury, feel like he's kind of plateaued. Peppers is going to hit 30, and it's a new scheme for him. Woodson's a rookie, and yeah, Mapu improved, but he's a second or third year guy now, so he's a third year guy now, so still a young player. Like, I want to see how does that group work together, especially when, as I said earlier, I think you can have the best corner tandem in the NFL with Gonzalez and Davis. What do you do at safety behind them and around them in the box as well?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And Woodson, to your point, I think is going to be a big part of this defense, especially as the season goes on. And I think that could potentially set the stage for what you were talking about in terms of his role moving forward in 2026 and beyond. But he does give them something that I think Belichick thought Duggar was going to be this. And then when they realized that Duggar's probably not going to be that, they go out and they draft Mapu. Mapu did get better as the year went on. He's still a tough guy for me to slot because
I agree.
While he's an exceptional athlete and he's long, he is more of a big nickel, box safety type that can play at or around the line of scrimmage. Woodson, to me, his instincts, his ability to plant and drive on the ball and break on routes, it's exceptional. And I think that's where his strength is going to be. He's not a guy, while he's athletic and he can flip his hips and baseball turn over the top as a free safety, depending on the coverage and the alignment. I think he's at his best playing downhill, driving on the ball in robber coverages or drop coverages where you have him driving to a hook curl and matching up, or as a box safety playing underneath. I think that's where he's at his best.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's how they're going to use him this year. And to your point, I think he's going to play a lot of man. I think you're going to match him up against tight ends in the slot. I think you're going to match him up against potentially bigger receivers in the slot, because gone are the days where your traditional slot receiver in the NFL has to be 5'9", 180 pounds. You want size there as well, depending on the opponent and how they align and cover. So Woodson's going to give him a lot of flexibility, and I think he's certainly another guy to keep an eye on both this week in mandatory minicamp, but in training camp as well.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think one other point on that is we talked a few months ago about where does Vrabel fall on the 3 safety versus 3 corner positions, right? Because there were years
yeah,
that
that's a
Belichick was
great,
all
great point.
yeah, and there were years that Belichick was all 3 safeties. Then there were years he was all 3 corners. There were years he mixed it up, right? It felt like Mayo last year went back and forth a little bit. It felt like they used more 3 corners at times, especially with Peppers being out. So I think the battle, ironically, is who do they like better, Craig Woodson or Marcus Jones? And that's going to be the thing to watch because if it's Marcus Jones, I think you're going to see a bunch of 3 corners. If it's Craig Woodson, I think you're going to see a bunch of 3 safeties. I still think they'll mix it up, but even though those guys don't
Yeah, I think
technically,
it'll be game plan specific.
yeah, but even though those guys don't technically play the same position, I think that's kind of a battle to watch. And which one of those guys do they trust more and do they like better? Because that might dictate, are they more 3 corner or are they more 3 safety?
Yeah, and I would tend to think that there'll be more of a 3 safety team maybe early because I do think they're a little deeper there. And I think again, if Woodson emerges in training camp, I think that'll also factor into that. But I would not be surprised if they did more 3 safety stuff early on, just because I think that if you have players at the safety position that are versatile and can be that 3-by-3 safety, meaning they can play all 3 downs at all 3 levels, I think that makes a world of difference. And again, I do think that even with the addition of Carlton Davis, there's still a little uncertainty to me at corner. There's a part of me that
I think
still,
beyond those 2 outside guys, it's a fair question, right? Because
yeah,
we can
because do
like,
they have enough inside? Do they have
yeah,
enough if they
and
want to go nickel or even dime, which is becoming a diminished coverage in the league? But do they have
yeah.
enough to potentially play 60 DBs if they wanted to, specifically 4 corners?
Yeah, and like I like Alex Austin a lot. I think he's got potential, but he hasn't proven a lot yet, right? Like Marcus Jones has shown some flashes, but I think he's shown arguably more on special teams even than he has at corner, and that's more of a
That's his value, and that's why you keep him on the roster.
right. And so that's to me, it's a fair question. Like I have some uncertainty at safety. There's also beyond Gonzalez and Davis some question marks, at corner. Just and it's more so again. I like Alex Austin, but he's got to show more, right? And there's guys there that we can like Marcellus Dial, but he's got to show
He
more, right?
struggled last year. I like
Exactly.
their depth at safety a lot more right now than I like it at corner. And to your point, too, another guy we haven't talked about is Del Pettis, who
Yeah.
played a big part in this defense last year and carved out a nice little role for himself. He's another guy that can play in the slot.
And I think that's one thing about this defense as a whole, that besides the defensive line, I think there are some fair depth questions at the other 2 levels, right? Like, and I know Jelani Tavai just got hurt at linebacker, but even if him and Spillane are healthy, I think their depth behind that is a question mark. I mean,
Thin.
is it
Yeah.
Cam Riley? Like Christian Ellis to me is a good special teamer. I don't think he should be. I mean, we started at the end of last year. I don't think he should be out there all the time on defense. Like Cam Riley's an unknown, right? And then we mentioned safety, we mentioned corner. So, and that's one thing that if you look at the overarching build of this team, and you and I talked about this after the season, it's going to be a couple years before they're really good. Like they're going to be better this year and they could maybe fight for a playoff spot, but it's going to be a couple years before I think they're a really good team once again. And part of that is the depth at those 2 levels of defense. I think it's continuing to improve the receiver position, the depth even at tight end. So like those are things where we can look at it now and say their roster is a lot better than it was a year ago. And their starters, I think, are a lot better. But that depth piece, that takes multiple years to build in. And I think the depth piece, it's not quite at some point, like a defensive line, I think it's there, right? At quarterback, I think you're okay. At running back, I think you're okay. But other positions, that depth element, it's going to take another offseason to get there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And again, I think they have enough, but like with every other team in the league, right? They have to stay healthy.
Yeah.
If they stay healthy, they'll be in pretty good shape. If they don't, then that depth you're talking about and the lack of it at certain positions will certainly come back and be a problem. All right, John, final thoughts here before we wrap it up. And again, we'll be coming to you throughout the summer, previewing training camp and everything else. We got plenty of good content coming up for you this summer. But some final thoughts here as we head into this all-important mandatory minicamp week.
Yeah, my final thoughts would be, can this mini camp be another step in the right direction? Because I think, again, They've taken a lot of good steps this offseason, whether it was the hiring of Rabel and his assistants, the bringing in of Milton Williams and Carlton Davis and Spillane, the draft. I think they had a pretty good draft. Obviously, we won't know for a few years definitively, but it feels like they've taken some steps. And the Diggs video thing was a little bit of a step back, how they handle it. So can they take some concrete steps forward in this mini camp? And can they use that as a launching pad to have a good training camp? Because this is a season to me where, as I said before, they can reasonably fight for a playoff spot. I'm not guaranteeing they'll get in, but they can reasonably fight for one. But this is kind of the time of year when it starts. Do you have a good OTA that leads into a good mini camp, that leads into a good training camp? So in these 3 days coming up, can they take a positive step forward? I think they have the elements in place. We're just going to be watching to see if they actually are able to do that.
Yeah, and it'll be fascinating to watch. I mean, again, we're going to predict final records and all this stuff throughout camp and heading into the season. But this is certainly on paper, in my opinion, the most improved team in the league, both from a coaching standpoint and a personnel standpoint. Right now it comes down to Drake May's development, staying healthy, and what does the rest of the AFC look like? On paper, they should be able to pretty much play with anybody in the conference. And in the league, the schedule is certainly favorable as well, especially the home slate. Everything is lined up for them. They just have to stay healthy. And again, I think we're going to get a better indication of what this football team is going to be this week. I think this week will give us a pretty good idea of what we can expect heading into training camp, and certainly what they could potentially be down the road. As always, stay with New England Football Journal. We'll have you covered throughout this week and heading into training camp. John and I will be doing plenty of Patriots Pulse content for you. And as always, John's one of the best radio personalities in the business. Make sure you follow him on X and you're following him along when he is on WEI. That'll do it for this episode of Patriots Pulse. For John Lyons, I'm John Sarianides. Until next time, peace.